Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Rymack, Special Advisor to the President for Industry Partnerships, Green Economy, and Sustainability. And I'm very pleased to open this event first with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chinookan nations on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. I'm also pleased with this to be part of this event because it links so closely towards Western at 150. Western University strategic plan that will carry us forward in the coming years. And in particularly with the theme around Western's place in the world, where we concentrate on place, engage the world, and look at sustainability as an imperative. Sustainability and climate change are two of the grand challenges of our times. Collaboration, innovation, and experimentation will be needed to seek bold and innovative and brave solutions. We are pursuing partnerships with local and regional municipalities, for example, whose own projects concentrate on challenges with areas such as water, waste, transportation, and biodiversity. Western researchers, students, and staff are engaged with local communities to assist with the socioeconomic challenges related to education, poverty, and health. In 2020 and 2021, Western was recognized by Times Higher Education Impact Ranking as one of the top contributors to sustainability research and teaching globally. For example, in SDG 1 and End Poverty, more than 5,700 hours of time were dedicated to Impact Experience, an experiential learning program that offers access to co-curricular opportunities for community projects around the world. SDG 2, End Hunger, and research has been undertaken to develop the best practices for ethical and sustainable aquaculture by using advanced genetic techniques, leading to higher growth efficiency for fish and reducing feeding costs by 25%. And I could go on with many examples. Western is home to a beautiful campus and embraces the responsibility to be stewards of the natural environment. And we're committed to encourage biodiversity and to make our campus a living laboratory for our academic community. And finally, and to reduce our own carbon footprint and our waste reduction, more efficient heating and cooling of our building, improving mobility. We've committed to net zero emissions for campus operations by 2050 and a 45% reduction by 2030. In all of these efforts, we will consider how the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals can guide our teaching, learning, and research. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dean Sharon Hodgson, the Dean of the Ivey Business School. Over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Andy, and welcome everyone to Ivey. We're thrilled to be hosting this event dedicated to incorporating sustainability into management education. Here at Ivey, we've just completed our strategic plan and shared it out with the community. Through this process, our commitment to sustainability in our teaching, our research, and our outreach has not only been reinforced, but it has been amplified. Sustainability is now embedded in our purpose. Our purpose statement, inspiring leaders for a sustainable and prosperous world. It's very intentional. At Ivey, sustainability needs to be the very core of the school. At Ivey, it is a major focus of our research today. It is embedded in our curriculum, but frankly, we need to do more. And as part of our strategy, we will be aligning additional resources to sustainability, as it is a critical issue for not only the boardroom, but also society, as Andy talked about. And it will be a spot where Ivey seeks to own or share the podium with other academic institutions in our efforts to influence future leaders and influence practice. We have been leaders in this space for a long time. For example, The Ivy Center for Building Sustainable Value, we call it the BSV, it was one of the first sustainability centers in a business school globally. It is recognized for its excellence and track record in research and in teaching. The Network for Business Sustainability, also known as the NBS, was founded within the Center of Building Sustainable Value and is a growing network of researchers and managers committed to advancing sustainable development in business. The network facilitates a community of more than 170 sustainability research centers in business schools around the world. Management education plays a leading role in creating the leaders of tomorrow, equipped to make the decisions necessary for an integrated sustainability agenda. Leaders must prioritize ESG and must contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, and not just commit, but actually contribute to make them happen. We need action and we need results. At Ivy, we are rising to this challenge, much like Western. We are well known for our case-based method of teaching, where students learn by analyzing real-life business cases in a classroom setting. Students are encouraged to consider a wide variety of issues and stakeholders when taking business decisions, including social and economic implications. Cases directly linked to sustainability issues are featured prominently in our portfolio of our curriculum today, and we are committed to increasing that prominence over the coming years. For the last 10 years, we have also offered an undergraduate certificate in sustainability, empowering our students to build and lead more sustainable organizations. The class size in these certificates have tripled, and our students continue to ask for more programming around sustainability. And we're about to launch a similar program at our graduate level. I also want to highlight one important initiative with impact far beyond just the Ivy classrooms. Ivy Publishing has recently undertaken a daunting task of tagging all of our cases in our library for linkages to the SDGs as well as to EDI-related issues. Tagging makes it easier for faculty to identify cases that integrate multiple sustainability topics, and it also encourages case writers to engage with and cover these topics in future cases. We are excited about the enormous potential that this initiative holds for distributing cases globally and the impact it can have on management education globally. Ivy professor Juana Bronzai developed the case tagging project and led its implementation. She also led the organization of this particular event today. Juana is the Donald F. Hunter Professor of International Business and a Professor of Strategy and Sustainability here at the Ivy Business School. And she's a faculty scholar at Western University and the founding director of the Sustainability Certificate Program, the founder, convener, and host of our PhD Sustainability Academy. Thank you to the Center for Building Sustainable Value, Ivy and Ivy Publishing for organizing this event. Thank you for giving me the time on the agenda today. And Juana, over to you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you, Andy. I'm Juana Bronze. I'm your convener and host for this event. And with no further ado, we're going to invite our three wonderful panelists to join the spotlight as I introduce each of them in turn. They are true leaders, pioneers in shaping the space, the conversation, leading by example, creating the research and creating the curriculum that today allows us to address the grand challenges that we share in our world. I will begin by introducing Jerry first. And for each of you, I have picked three of the most recent of your many, many accomplishments. These are some of my personal favorites. And for each of you, I use these resources in my own classrooms, in my own professional and research practice. So I highly encourage everyone in the webinar to make quick notes and go and avail yourself of these wonderful resources. So Jerry is professor at McDowell School of Business in Georgetown University. And the three features that I have picked for you, George, are the Handbook on the Business of Sustainability, the Organization, Implementation, and Practice of Sustainable Growth that is just out in 2022. Of course, one of my personal favorite, aligned with IB's purpose, is your piece in the Journal of Management that is still in production, but your copyright is 2021, and the Handbook of Inclusive Innovation that is a couple of years out, but continues to really be the top of the practice. Also with us, we have a Mette Morsink, and Mette is the head of the Principles for Responsible Management Education, what we know as the Prime Secretariat. She's also a true leader in creating the global curriculum and the global conversation of what it is to lead responsibly in management education. And the impressive collection on the Prime Global Movement is just out with Routledge as well in 2022. Mette has, of course, a scholarship practice in Partnership for Development. And one of the most recent pieces in World Business is one of my favorite as well. And Mette has created curriculum in aspirational talk, and how do we move from the present to a future that we would like to see. The third panelist is Laura Morgan Roberts, and Laura is professor at Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. And Laura has been an advocate of positive organizing, of resilience, of voice and representation. And her book on race, work, and leadership, New Perspective on the Black Experience, out with Harvard Business Press in 2019, has truly galvanized attention to leadership and representation just before we went into the turbulent waters of the pandemic. But one of the most recent conversational pieces that I urge all of you to pay attention to is when and how to respond to microaggressions. I believe this should be part of everyone's curriculum as we teach in business schools, as well as the recent piece in the research handbook on organizational resilience, really examining resilience through the lens of Black women at work. With those brief introductions, we're going to launch straight into the panel. We're pressed from time. We have 3 questions that the panelists have prepared in advance, and each of them will lead on one of the questions. I will indicate the order as we start. Panelists, are we ready to start? It's wonderful discussion, wonderful. So we kept the questions as active as possible, and Mette has kindly volunteered to be the first to answer the first question, and perhaps George and Laura can follow. Why are the ESG and the SDGs demanding urgent attention and action? How can business schools, and especially business school professors, galvanize emerging best practices on ESG and SDGs during education? Should we craft dedicated courses and pedagogies, or should we aim to integrate them in as many subjects as possible? Mette, please take it over.
Thank you so much, Juana, for having me here, for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. I'm delighted to be on this prominent panel with Jerry and Laura as well. So thank you so very, very much for inviting me. So fast response, my first response here to your question about why is this so important? Right now, I am at the annual AACSB conference in New Orleans, and yesterday in a bus going somewhere, I was sitting next to a dean from Indonesia, and he was saying to me, I'm so worried about climate change and nobody seems to care. Soon, you know, all the islands of Indonesia will be flooded, we will not be here anymore if we do not take action. This is urgent. And it seems like even in the classrooms, we do not take that action. We're still teaching, if we're teaching green sustainability or green something, it is green growth. So it's still the growth paradigm that is permeating the curriculum. So I think this is something for us to consider seriously when we enter that classroom and what kind of curriculum we bring on. To your second question, mainstream, standalone courses, how do we get this into the classroom? And my short answer is we need both. We need, of course, the standalone course, because that's where innovation, that's where you can go into depth with students, but also yourself as an educator. But we indeed need the mainstreaming as well across all programs for the benefit of our students, who will become the finance professional in a moment, who will become the accountant in some company, or who will be leading an NGO or a government program somewhere, and making big decisions on supply chain and purchase of different kinds of products and services. So of course we need the mainstreaming, but I think what we really need to focus on, and then I'll stop, is we really need to focus on how do we then educate those colleagues of ours, that faculty in all these disciplines, to take on the challenge of actually bringing in climate change, human rights, anti-poverty, inequalities into the classroom, because this is not what many of us were educated back in the days to actually do. We need to professionalize our faculty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meta. Jerry.
Thank you very much, Anna, and it's fantastic to be here. I started my journey broadly in sustainability and grand challenges over 15 years ago. So it's always a pleasure to talk about this topic and how it can be integrated into our curriculum. The reason why I joined Georgetown about a year ago, the McDonough School of Business. And part of that is this idea of the common good and the Jesuit identity associated with that, right? So, and there are two elements in how broadly we approach education itself. One, we talk about the individual formation, and the second element is about common good, right? And both of these speak directly to what we talk about today, about sustainability as a topic, but really about making the world better in whichever way we can, right? And the reason why I raise this is because we need to shift this whole discussion and how we teach sustainability from a compliance mindset to one of formation, where we truly believe that this is our worldview, and how we go about it makes a difference. And then we take that and integrate it across the curriculum in every course that we have, but also we need to create standalone courses. So I generally teach managing growth, growing entrepreneurial businesses. Now I'm creating a course on business and the common good. And with the idea that we approach this from every discipline and how we integrate that as a capstone experience across the whole curriculum, and bringing it all together in the final year for students. And this could be in the undergraduate and the master's and the executive audience. So truly about emphasizing this notion of formation, this idea of common good, and integrating and pulling everything together as a worldview. So I'll let Laura go next and give her views.
That's very, very exciting and inspiring. To both Jerry and Meta, Juana, thank you for having me here. Tremendous admiration for your work and for the work of colleagues at Ivy. Delighted to be a part of this conversation. Would start by saying that my entree into these discussions is generally through the vantage point of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and justice. And I take up those questions in ways that, examine inequality and structural patterns that enforce and reproduce inequality. We can talk more about that in our time together. But through a sustainability lens, especially interested in trying to understand and unearth and support the generative practices that are sustainable, that will help us to be able to build the kinds of connections through collaborative efforts, through partnerships and stakeholder engagement that are value creating for the collective, for the whole, for the greater good, in the ways in which you framed it. And so I come with that question also with the context of what often happens, particularly with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion, and resourcing. And that's centuries and centuries upon exploitative practices that extract value from certain communities, from geographically, politically, from different socio-demographic groups, based on the various structures or practices of inequality. For instance, in the United States, 400 centuries of extracting physical labor and emotional labor from Black and Brown communities, without investing in the individuals who are performing that labor, the communities in which they live and work, which then has a number of spiraling effects for the environment and for the greater good. So for our students then, and for our roles as professors, what can we do? One is to raise the awareness of the world in which we live, the socio-historical context. In business education, for a long time in many classrooms, we've sort of talked about management issues as if they happen within a bubble that is defined by the leaders of the organization. Really appreciate and moving forward here in these conversations that we are looking at the permeable boundaries and the interface between the firm, the business, and the broader society or community. And I think that should come through in all of our courses, right? I also support, I do support like Meta and Jerry, the both and approach. And so content-wise, I think that broader consciousness should be infused in all of the courses, taking a socio-historical perspective to understand how we came to be where we are, and to then anticipate where we will be going in the future if we continue in these same behaviors and practices. What is the road upon which we're traveling, and how do we evaluate impact, not just quarter by quarter, but for longer term? We can ask those questions in all of our courses, but then also having the focused conversations that allow for more depth, I think are very helpful and powerful.
Thank you so much for this warming question. Now we're going to get serious, because do you have a favorite SDG, or do you love them all the same? And I'm going to invite Laura to stay on the stage and speak first on this. But we've asked each of the three panelists to advocate for one of the 17 SDGs that you're devoting personal and professional currency and commitment to. And super fast, a micro teach. Tell us what you deem most compelling and give us an example of a case or a company that you like to use to bring this particular SDG to life in your own teaching, in your own classroom. Laura, can you go first? And then Jerry, you could please follow.
Yes, so I told Juana, I think this is a little bit of a trick question for me because as I think about racial inequality and inequity, it connects in so many ways to, most of the 17 on the list. Would hone in to number 5 in gender and intersectionality and the unique challenges that women of color face. I've invested a considerable amount into that particular conversation as it relates to my classroom, my teaching, and my research. But I think that's embedded within broader conversations around number 10, reduced inequalities. And then, as I mentioned initially, the decent work and economic growth. As I think about decent work and, a history of labor exploitation, I also make some connections there between racial justice and inequality. The micro teaching that I wanted to lift up in this forum is a case study that I started researching when I lived in Boston and I was a professor at the Harvard Business School in the early 2000s. I published a case study on a nonprofit in Boston called The Partnership. And The Partnership is a nonprofit that supports leadership development for professionals of color. It was initiated as a multi-stakeholder partnership, literally, that would address inequality and what was called the brain drain due to a racially hostile climate in Boston in the 1980s. Boston, Massachusetts had forced desegregation of schools through busing as late as the 1980s. And so this is an environment where a lot of people would come to get educated. A lot of Black professionals would come to the graduate school programs, but they wouldn't stay because they didn't feel that they could have decent work. They didn't feel that they could have the support, the mentoring, and the opportunities for advancement within that community. So the case study is about how Benny Wiley, who's a Harvard Business School alum, one of the first women, and certainly one of the first Black women to graduate from Harvard Business School, in the 70s, how she became CEO of the partnership, was able to build bridges among various stakeholders to help the community to see the interface between what was a newly discovered or a newly advocated business case for diversity, which is, mundane right now, but at the time it wasn't, and a social justice perspective to reduce inequality. That organization has grown by leaps and bounds and has had tremendous impact. And so I always enjoy teaching it because I'm able to continue to give updates around the work that the organization is doing even now and the ways in which they've been able to leverage the increased global attention and investment in reducing racial inequality in the workforce.
Thank you so much. And this is for the audience. This is like asking each of us to pick a favorite child among hundreds and hundreds of wonderful stories. So this is very hard. Please pay a lot of attention. Jerry, take it away, please.
Thanks, Anna. I've given this a lot of thought in terms of how as a management professor you can come at it, right? And for me, SDG 17 is the one that speaks the most, right? Which is about partnerships. That's the only goal which is not about a specific outcome by itself, but it's one that connects and builds everything else, that the other 16 that are there. So, and the sort of a moment that I had to reflect on this was this, as I was in a boardroom discussion where this financial institution is asking this big question on if we, I was in Singapore before this, and so if we are lending to palm oil plantations, right, in Southeast Asia, does that conflict with our outcomes, right, sustainability outcomes? The reality is this, is that on one corner, you would have people who would say that palm oil reduces biodiversity, right? And so it conflicts with that. But palm oil plantations in places like Indonesia, Malaysia, and so forth, employ about 5 million individuals and their families, right? So it conflicts with this idea of poverty or education and so forth, right? If you have that as a goal. So companies have to navigate these tensions between whether I'm doing good or doing better, right? And that choice really comes to, focuses its efforts on the power of partnerships and really how you manage these relationships and implement it so that when we talk about this common good idea that you make progress, but you don't really leave people behind. And that tension really is a very significant implementation or execution challenge as we think about sustainability across the board. So for me, 17 is the one that speaks to me the most. Another, if I take my second favorite child, it would be 13 on climate action, right? More recently, this past year, I had a paper out as well on new business models for tackling climate change. And that's created an enormous it's got over 100 citations in less than a year, but it's also this, it speaks at the right moment to say, how can we do something about it? How can we think of venturing in this space? Because I'm an entrepreneurship professor, I talk about starting new ventures and growth ventures that take this and put this as at the core of their purpose. So for me, 17 and 13 would speak very well to me. Now, in terms of how I've gone about it, about 10 years ago, we started off with this project when I was in Imperial College in London on rural electrification in Kitengoni in Kenya. And we started thinking about how do we implement sustainable rural electrification grids in different villages and really scale this across the country. So we formed a partnership called Energy for Development that sort of spoke to that topic and built that. So I wrote that as a case study, which I use in my class, where it also goes with the simulation of how do you balance things like demand estimation, pricing issues, governance issues, and sort of bring these complex or operational challenges associated with rural electrification at a village level, and how do you make that happen? So for me, that while we think lofty thoughts, really the outcome of any of our actions is based on how well we do it. And whether it's a single project or whether we think big, we still need to start with the smallest step. So I take this in my MBA class to highlight sort of rural electrification as a project and what the challenges are and how you'd manage these complexities of operations and governance and distributive fairness and everything else in a single project. The second one, which reflects my climate action element, is one that I've just wrote 2 months ago. I've just started last week in my MBA class on handprint tech. It's a company that focuses on sustainability as a service out of Singapore. And it was one of the co-founders was my former postdoc, Simon Schillerbix, and my co-author over time, incredible fellow. And the reason why handprint is great is because it reflects this idea of partnership. How can we work with larger companies and connect them with those who implement projects in these different communities so that you can become a platform of sustainability actions, right? And focus on regeneration rather than mitigation. So both of these, Energy for Development as well as handprint tech, case studies that I use, but they come at partnerships from different angles. How can we implement things? How can we really conceive the constraints around fairness and access considerations in all the things that we do, but all targeted to making the world better.
Thank you so much. And Meta.
Yes, no, thank you very much. Thank you, Jerry, for paving the ground for me here, because I happen to have the same favorite number 17, goal as the one that I want to bring to the talk here today. Indeed. So thank you for so eloquently, bringing around your argumentation and your thinking of it. I thought that was really inspiring to hear. So I come from I want to sort of present a little bit of a different angle to the partnership as my favorite goal here. And I'm sort of concerned that we are educating our students with a me first attitude, that we are teaching them, that what matters most, that is your career, it is your advancement, it is your increase in salary. Just think about how we as business schools are ourselves ranked. Very big part of that ranking happens to be about how fast we advance our alumni to have a salary increase after they graduate from our schools. And of course, that attitude trickles down upon how we engage with our students, what we teach them, how we drive them to think of themselves as successful business leaders. So I think we need to think about how we redefine success from a me first attitude to an attitude of partnership. If you also think about I'm sort of, as a communication scholar in the corporate sphere, I've sort of been looking into, and with colleagues, been inspired to look a little bit into the language that we use in our management schools. And that language is almost, as some colleagues have called it, a language of warfare, where success is the successful leader is one who wins the battle. It is one who conquers, attacks, defends, market share. There was actually a Harvard Business School book out not so many years ago. It's about, and it's talking about Are you playing to play? Are you playing to win? And it has a vocabulary, a language about kill the enemies. So it's, and the enemy, of course, being the competitor. So this is what we're bringing into the classroom. This is the way consultants, business leaders, and we ourselves, I'm sad to say, also bring into the classroom to our students. So success means the leader who wins the battle. This is a little bit in opposition to the kind of success that goal number 17 brings along, which is about partnerships, where we can only do this together. It's a language of collaboration, of co-creation, one where we should, if we are winning, we're winning together, and not one is a loser and one is a winner. And it carries a completely different way of thinking about what success looks like for a leader and for a business. So I think that this redefinition of success toward partnerships is something where we are seriously lagging behind in our curriculum and in our teaching. So that's one thing. The other thing about why I really like partnerships is also because I've been investigating this myself in my own research. And I certainly think that I see a lot of wonderful partnerships. And my favorite, you asked Juana for a favorite one, that's the one written by some colleagues, which is Novo Nordisk and Red Cross. This is a pharmaceutical insulin diabetes company together with Red Cross. They made a beautiful partnership about how to, you could say, alleviate the epidemic, as they call it themselves, the epidemic disease that is really serious in many countries around the world, the diabetes. So I think that is a beautiful, and not without its complexities, which is why I like it. It's sort of also showcasing some of the, difficulties there is in when you align different interests, not different targets perhaps, but different interests to the table, different languages, different competences, expertise, etc. So that's one of my favorite cases. Also, my own research has sort of taken me one step deeper into what is a successful partnership? What does it look like? And I think it's fair to say that the SDG partnership platform, they say that only 24% of partnerships are actually fulfilling the aspiration they set out to do. So we have 76% of these partnerships. They are not meeting the needs of the beneficiaries or the need of what they set out to do. That's a lot. And I think we know too little about the success of the partnership. We know a lot about getting the right people around the table. We need diversity. So you could say that input legitimacy is there, but the output legitimacy, what actually comes out of it, what is the impact of the partnership? We know very little about that. And I was, for example, studying a partnership between African, this is Ghana, African and European, this is Germany and the Nordics. A partnership between businesses and NGO and government on a particular business case. And this case we were studying was claimed as the best partnership on numerous occasions. And when we dug just a little bit deeper into it, it was, of course, with a lot of complexity, but at the end of the day, we were questioning, was it really benefiting those single mothers in Ghana that it set out to benefit? I'm sad to say that those single mothers were never really asked if they were impacted in a good way, and if the impact was lasting, if the skills that they were promised to improve were actually also doing good in their livelihoods, for their lives. The problems that they had with having someone to take care of their children because they had to get on the bus away from the village to go and assemble the products that they were producing, etc. I'm just saying, we need to think about the impact potential. The moment you start out with the partnership, you need to think about what is the impact potential. And I think not just the impact, but the impact potential, because of course you don't know the impact, but you can at least at each design phase, the execution phase, getting the right people around the table for the partnership, at each phase, think about, are we really, hitting the right or sort of getting the right impact out of what we're doing right here. So I think that there's a lot of us for us to do in terms of understanding that long-term impact of these beautiful partnerships that we are seeing more and more of, fortunately, today. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you. And we're going to have one closing question. We have many questions from the audience. And I'm going to preface the last question for the panelists with Maya's encouragement to please let our passion ripple and show, both in the Q&A and in the conversation and in the classroom. And Maya is saying, what's the most challenging or provoking thing you'd like to say here? What do you feel is not being heard? Or what would you like to repeat that you have already said? What's the urgent and important message you want to share? And I hope, Maya, I have given it that passion that you're asking for. The question that we're going to close the panel and then show you a little bit of our collection, as well as have a couple of moments for Q&A with the audience, is really designed to galvanize our collective energy, to really call forth the power of ESG and SDG case teaching. How do our practice and profession today change our tomorrow? What is going to be new and different about leadership, capitalism, and even humanity tomorrow as a result? What is the role of ESGs and SDGs in aligning the role of business schools with the most pressing grand challenges? And Jerry, it's only fair that as a former dean and as an architect of this conversation, you get to lead us in this closing round.
Well, I'm in trouble if that's the case, right? So, but here's the thing. Maya's question is a fantastic question, right? It feels somehow it's like the stone that was cast away becomes the foundation stone. Sort of, not to be too biblical about it, but this idea is that sometimes our whole feeling has been over the past 10 years that sustainability has been sort of this sidecar to this main effort that's going on, right? And somehow the sidecar has become, over time, will become the main car, right? In terms of where our intellectual conversations are being carried. So if you think about this in where case studies come in and how the power of case studies is, for me, case studies are about functional problem solving. Right? It helps us focus our efforts on identifying what is the causal problem and how do we go about generating solutions for it, right? And that's functional problem solving. For me, research is about identifying that systemic problems, right? The structural problems, where the functional problems can sit underneath that. So if we take on a systemic problem and say, how do we solve for the problem of access and reach, for example, or the last mile problem, as we would call it? And there are multiple examples that we can take from case studies to say, here are different ways that companies have solved this or approached this issue. And if we put our collective minds and effort behind it, maybe we can come up with a solution in this particular context, right? And that's the power of case studies that allow us. At the same time, I believe that the power of research is to put that umbrella, the framework for us to think about, are we missing the big picture in this? To me, business education and how we teach it is about going between structural thinking and functional thinking. And to iterate between the two allows students to then appreciate a bigger picture and how we fit within that big picture, right? The frustrations come in many ways, but one thing that I do feel that in business school teaching that we are becoming softer on is this idea of metrics on science-based targets and sort of saying, how does this truly matter in measurement and impact, and then and getting to that, right? And to say that the value we create may not always be captured in terms of pricing or the profits that we make, but truly the value we create is the social value we leave on the table. And to show how we leave value on the table is critical to then say that everybody becomes better off because of the value we leave, right? So rather than focusing only on value capture, maybe there are ways in which we think about how we create value versus how we capture value are two different pieces to it.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Laura, can you go next?
Sure. So first, when I get the invitation about personal passion, my personal passion comes from my personal story. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, which was a steel town. I grew up in the 1980s. So I grew up at the interface of, living literally in pollution, and the remnants of pollution and gray skies in a steel town that also was at that point in US history, the most segregated region of the United States of America. There was extreme hyper segregation due to white flight. During the civil rights movement, Gary, Indiana elected a Black mayor, Richard Hatcher, one of the first larger US cities to do so. And so my father is a physician. And so the health wealth disparities were front and center in my world and in my community, and have just driven me and fed my passion ever since. I cannot think about conversations around climate and environmentalism and sustainability, without thinking about the inner city, the urban areas that were, just the living landmines of toxicity, political toxicity, as well as environmental toxicity, and how that creates perpetual gaps in health and wealth. And the ways in which that equality, after 2 years of a global pandemic, it's not becoming minimized or eradicated, but expanding exponentially. I'm deeply alarmed and concerned by the growing health wealth gaps as we come into this next iteration of the COVID-19 global pandemic and experience. So, what are we doing in our classrooms? What is the power of case teaching? Case teaching tells the story. The power of the story that is contextualized, that puts our students in the position of trying to make sense of some incomplete data and carve forward a better way, and to be able to challenge one another's thinking in real time. That's my hope and aspiration for what we're doing around these grand challenges and wicked problems that are, deeply intersectional and tied together in some quite thorny ways. My concerns at this point are, and again, I know we're in a global group. I am US based. And because of that, I am quite mindful of the political, local, regional, state, and even some federal moves to censor and suppress many of the conversations about human rights, about injustice, about inequality, of recent efforts in recent years to roll back the different climate protections that are necessary for all of us to survive on our planet, but even more necessary for the most vulnerable groups to be able to survive, to thrive, and flourish, to have access to the quality education, fresh water, Flint, Michigan, East Chicago, Indiana, which is right next to Gary, where I grew up, had the same water pollution issues that Flint had. At the same time, it just wasn't publicized as widely as the Flint scenario. So, I do think that continuing to push and drive in our classrooms and in our content, toward action is essential. But I'm also watching the tide of people who feel that these conversations sort of make them feel uncomfortable or not helpful or not valuable for them, and are pushing legislation to keep these conversations out of our classrooms. So I would just say, for us to keep writing, keep teaching, keep telling the stories, keep facilitating the work. And that truly does take a whole lot of passion and courage as well. So thank you for the questions.
It does take courage to push through that discomfort but that is the tomorrow that we want, that we owe our students, right? Like, this is irresponsible for us, as I'm handing it over to Meta. How do we lead? How do we claim to lead for and with society without having the courage to push our own students through this uncomfortable, turbulent, but existential crisis of our times, right? Meta.
Yes, no, thank you so much for this. This is really inspiring. Thank you very much. So my super concern is how we need leaders who can think creatively, cross-disciplinary, who can, address the wicked problems out there to which there are no predefined solution. So what we do with these students, and that's my concern, we need student agency, but what do we do with them? We put them in the classroom and then we pacify them. We make them sit there and listen to the wise words from the professor at the end of the podium. I've been there myself. I can honestly confess that in this little exclusive group here, I've done that over many, many years. Whether I had 10 people in the classroom, I had 500 people in the classroom, I was professing. And I have to say, I'm sad to say, we are still professing. We are still standing there in front of the group, whether they are 10 or 500, professing. Students are, eyes are going up and down, and you can see how it doesn't energize the student. It doesn't make them reflect. It doesn't make them think themselves. So I think we really need to think faculty development in terms of how do we, and I'm not talking about curriculum change here, I'm talking about faculty development. How do we as professors become better educators by taking on another kind of educational approach than the professing approach, if you like. So how do we mobilize the social, interpersonal skills of our students, the emotional skills of our students, the creative skills of our students, and some have even talked about the physical in terms of material skills of our students, that they also know how to solve these problems in a more material sense out there. So that's what I think we should focus on. It's not an easy one because none of our faculty is awarded to enhance those skills. I mean, it's not on the tenure track promotion list to list very much. Some say it is, and I know it is in some schools more than in others, part of the promotion criteria, but it should be valued, and it should be taught at a much more speedier rate, if you like. And I think also we by doing that, we should also help our faculty across the different disciplines to actually do so, and to bring in the SDG agendas and to bring in new pedagogical skill sets to actually mobilize you could sort of say, the energy from the students and for themselves to be reflective learners. I think also the problem is the exam. So here we are bringing in the curriculum, professing the curriculum over 4 months maybe, and then after 4 months, the students are still in the classroom because they need the degree. Then we exam them and ask them if they can imitate and repeat that curriculum we've been teaching them for 4 months. I'm not sure exactly what kind of creativity, what kind of innovative capacity, what kind of cross-disciplinary thinking that comes out of it. So I think I don't have the exact solution, but I can let you know I'm working on it within my current position as head of Prime, because I was fortunate enough to get a big grant to actually roll out a program for our community to think about how do we, because I know some of us already do that, but some of us don't. So how can we scale this up, inspire each other? And here I'm talking about globally. So that's my passion right now.
What a wonderful punchline. We had more than a dozen of questions, and all of them revolve around this thorny issue of institutional roadblocks, institutional change ratings. So as we rotate the stage to finish on time, our IB team has prepared a very small sample of the most recent cases, so the 2022 and a handful of late 2021 cases on each SDGs that we're going to flash by the audience as a moment of pride, and thank you to the many colleagues at Ivy, the many members of the staff that are producing these cases, calling for more cases, and of course Bella Peck, who was my partner. She's now joining Ivy as a PhD student, and she's also featured in this latest collection. As we do that, I'm going to invite each panelist to perhaps share a few thoughts on the chat room, and I'm going to invite Matthew and Paul to be ready to swap the spotlights right after we get through this drum roll of cases, the most recent in our collection, all tagged on SDGs and ripe and ready for your adoption across the world. Thank you so much. Before we rotate the stage, Mette, Jerry, Laura, thank you for sharing your passion, your best practice, and especially for sharing your passion for the tomorrow we want to see in leadership and society. Thank you so much. And we're gonna watch the chat room for the answers to those institutional thorns from the panelists and from anyone in the audience that has answers as well. So here's some of our most recent, hot off the press, Grameen America, looking at how microfinance can come back to North America and solve poverty at home. Number 2, we have really crickets. This is one of the Gates Foundation. It's right here in London, Ontario, the largest, most sustainable protein plant. One of Ravi, you mentioned Danone in the chat room. This is a very recent case ready to be taught. We have also PepsiCo in really establishing a role in sustainable society. Number 3, this is psychosocial well-being during the crisis. All of these in the collection span different contexts and different disciplines, and we're just going to keep rolling really quickly so that we can get through all of them. This comes from South Africa. It looks how do we gear up for maintaining, for diminishing disparities, especially during COVID. And number 5, this is really a thorny case on how do we promote gender equality at the top, even when we're about to lose it. Number 6, a couple of examples of sustainable water. This is a 2-part case that we're featuring here. Whomever is at the control, keep moving fast. Yes, affordable energy. We can talk everywhere from the restructuring of the old footprint to the creation of the new energy infrastructure. Number 8, and Laura, one of your favorites, right? And we have everything from indigenous new forms, child labor, assessing corporate impact in the case of refugees. Hopefully everyone in the audience finds something to take home. Industry and infrastructure, an award-winning case on 2 cases on circular economy, Tesla, but also new materials. Number 10. Here we have a lot, Laura. We really have a lot, but I would encourage the simulation, breaking the silence at work and bringing our own story forward. Sustainable community and partnerships across the world, the engine of success. Number 12, our bread and butter in a business school. And here are some recent cases with sustainable brands, but also indigenous brands, non-binary brands, and pivots during the pandemic. Climate action, these are excellent simulations and new techniques in terms of how to account for and finance climate change. Life below water, the happy turtle, again, a circular economy case in India. 15. One of our Ivy favorites, 10-tree, but also this conflict between human and non-human, and one of my personal favorite, Panda Base as well. Number 16, this is a very new case in which offers ballistic clothing, very controversial. We will see a lot more on 16 with the many wars around the world. And of course, a crowd popular today, one of my personal favorites as well. And this is a wonderful system thinking innovation through collaboration, as well as looking at ecotourism. We thank all of you. Have we seen answers from, yes, we have seen answers from the panelists. Panelists, you're off the stage. Matthew, the Associate Director for the Center for Building Sustainable Value, and Paul Vivish, you get to replace us all with your closing comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Juana. And what a wonderful event. What a wonderful event. Thank you so much, Juana. Sorry, I was muted there. Really very happy to host such a rich conversation. In the interest of time, I just wanted to finish with two quick observations, a sort of specific one and then perhaps a more institutional one. The first one, a lot of today was focused necessarily by the subject on perhaps the supply side of education, but I just wanted to reiterate the demand side. As the Dean mentioned in the introduction, we've seen exponential growth in our interests from students in sustainability programming, and current business students are so aware, so knowledgeable on these subjects. And a lot of business teaching is quite specific, focusing on specific cases, specific examples. And the SDGs are incredibly important for bringing that global relevance and impact into that discourse and pedagogy. So incredibly important to think on the demand side. And on the institutional side, a lot of what we've talked about today has not just been about teaching, but more about the impact of business schools as institutions. And I think we're seeing, for those of you that follow corporate reporting, a lot of corporations now are framing their societal impact around the SDGs. And I think it's a really important opportunity also for business schools to be doing it. And that's why it's wonderful to have Meta as part of this conversation, because that's very much what Prime is about as an institution. And the progress reporting is a really important opportunity for us as institutions to be reflecting on our impact on the SDGs across teaching, research, and outreach. Just some final thoughts there. And I'll now pass to my colleague, Professor Paul Beamish, to finish off.
Thank you, Matt and Juana. It's a pleasure for me to be with such a positive group. I think over the last 2 years with COVID, I've never been at such a happy meeting as this. I mean, people are moving in the same direction. They're not throwing stones at each other. They're not challenging each other. They're being supportive. Boy, this is great. I'm going to come to more of these things, Juana. So sign me up next time as well. A couple of quick comments. There's a lot of support for the case method here, and I'm delighted to see it as somebody who's written a lot of cases over the decades. And certainly, you know, to the question of infusing sustainability into courses or relying on new courses, this reminds me of what international business went through some years ago. And the short answer is you got to do both. You can't leave it to one or the other. You'll never make it through the infusion method, because depending on who's teaching the course, they're either going to ignore it or they're going to embrace it, but you don't know. So you have to do both. I take a very international perspective, and I would encourage you, if you're not already doing it, to think bigger, think broader than what you're doing. And Juana suggested I speak very briefly about an initiative I started in 2010 called the 39 Country Initiative, and it makes Ivy cases available for free in those cases that have per capita income of less than $2,000. And that means they're crazy poor. And so my interest personally is poverty reduction, with the logic that if we can get higher quality current teaching material in the hands of the students who are in business schools and universities in these poorest countries, they're going to, as future managers, make better decisions. They're not going to make rookie mistakes and so forth. And they will then help to move their country out of poverty, because, you know, a good basis in management education is essential. So I've spent already part of my morning today trying to convince the new executive director of Ivy Publishing that we have to move even faster with this. So we're in the process of trying to approach another 400 universities that we've identified in the poorest countries to try to sign up. And I think that broad, larger initiatives are going to be welcome, because there were 115 people or 20 people on the call today, and it was great content. Enjoyed it very much. But let's figure out a way to get it to 1,200 people, and then 12,000 people, et cetera, because I think that is so important. But what you've done today, folks, I applaud you. So thank you very much for this.
Collective round of applause for everyone in the audience who took time to join us and share their passion. Of course, our dear panelists, but also our opening speakers and closing speakers as well. Thank you. The replays will be available from Ivy Publishing as well as from Ivy's Center for Building Sustainable Value. And we are launching new SDGs cases in the collection every single day. Please come visit us to pick up the best and to be the first in this practice. Thank you.